wow. And so little by little, as I realized that, I started taking notice of how sexual fantasies were doing that. And I would not try and live out their sexual fantasies exactly as they saw them in their mind's eye at all. That didn't work. I learned very, very quickly that you didn't necessarily literally have to have a threesome. You didn't even literally need to have a blonde with big boobs. That was not the point. That was all just a symbolic story that got your defenses down so you could open up. Once you understood how those defenses came down, you could create real life experiences that had the same effect. And I
Mhm.
started using people's sexual fantasies as a map, their desire as a compass, and their sexual fantasies a map to create these real life lived experiences where we could access this level of dancing like no one's watching kind of sex, and this incredible pleasure and intimacy and openness that we really all crave. We're hungry for this.
This is Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, with Whitney Ann Jenkins. Hello, and welcome to the 73rd episode of Unconditioning, Discovering the Voice Within, where I bring on guests and we talk about the inner authentic voice and the challenges and the rewards that come from following it. This week I have with me Artemesia DeVine. Artemesia is a sexual fantasy expert who teaches the world's leading sexperts the meaning of our sexual fantasies and how to bring them out of our heads and into our beds. She is the author of upcoming book The Spirituality of Smut, The Surprising Wisdom of Sexual Fantasies. She has 30 years of studying how our turn-ons work and has explored the nature of desire. Most impactful was the 12 years that she spent as a sex worker and a professional dominatrix. And she says that nothing teaches you more about the psychology of what turns us on and how sexual fantasies work than being paid to become the sexual fantasy of thousands of people. Living it gives you a perspective that a university degree can't touch. This is perhaps one of my favorite episodes that I've ever done on this podcast, and that's saying a lot because I've had quite a few guests so far, and a lot of really good ones. I really enjoyed the genuine camaraderie and connection. I felt like Artemisia and I were just talking like girlfriends and giggling at a sleepover, and she's so full of profound wisdom in a topic that I feel is so incredibly important that we don't really talk about in our society very much. So I hope that you find this episode as enjoyable as I did, and I can't wait to hear what you think. So here, without any more introduction from me, is Artemisia DeVine.
How do I pronounce your name properly?
Artemisia DeVine.
Artemisia DeVine. That's beautiful. I like that a lot.
Thank you.
So, Artemisia, you guide people to find their fantasies in their lives, which I feel like is part of our inner voice and our intuition in some ways. And so, in order for you to be able to guide people to do this, you had to explore a lot on your own and discover a lot on your own. And so, one of the first questions that I like to ask my guests is, when is the first time that you realized that you had this intuition or inner voice within yourself and you were able to follow it?
What a juicy question. That's a great question to start with. Um, there's a few different inner voices, according to my model. Um, apparently, the way that I conceptualize things is a little bit similar to internal family systems, but I've never studied that, so I don't know. People just tell me that that's what it is. I'm all about stories.
Mm.
So I came up with a metaphor story about how my own psyche works. I came up with this idea. I thought, okay, I can hear all of these different parts having conversations inside of myself, not in a way, in a mentally ill way, but in a just a normal, this is how my psyche works way. I think that the psyche is made up of different organs, just like your body is. So like there's a lung that does the lungs job, there's the heart that does the heart's job, there's, the spleen that does the spleen's job. We don't get mad at the spleen for not doing the heart's job. We go, it only knows how to do the spleen's job. So we accept that and we go, okay, that's the spleen's wisdom. We won't try and make it do anything else. Part of my psyche, I thought, yeah, the psyche is made up of all of these different organs too. There's different parts that want to do different things. There's an organ that's really excited about telling me where I am on my risk safety ratio at any given time. And it's got a very particular voice if I listen to it. And there's another voice in there that's all about protecting my sense of self, which you might want to call the ego, for instance. People have different models for these things, but ego is something that people often recognize as a thing that gives you a sense of self. Or there's this other voice that sends desires. It sends wanting, because that's what desire is. It's wanting. I want. And I'm particularly interested in sexual desires, but we'll get to that in a moment. When I realized that there was different voices, I started asking them how they worked. I started putting my attention on them and I said, hey, desire, you're really confusing. Why are you sending these sexual fantasies to me about behaving in ways that I don't actually want to be, I don't want to be treated like that in everyday life. I don't want that as a real kind of relationship. I don't want to treat other people like that. And yet you're making this really sexually exciting for me. Desire, can you actually tell me what you're trying to say here? What is your language? What is your logic? As an organ of the psyche, what is your genius? What are you in charge of? And then I paid attention and I listened to it. And it told me. It had its, if you pay attention, you listen to your own body signals, you listen to your own internal narratives, and you ask it and you focus and you put your attention on it repeatedly, you can actually have two-way conversations with these aspects of yourself, and they will reveal themselves. You can, like any relationship with anybody else, it takes time. You actually have to learn their logic. You have to learn how they work. You have to learn their language, and then you can form an allyship. And then you go, oh, that's how you work. And now I understand what you were trying to do by sending me those really kinky or perverted fantasies. Now I understand what that's all about. And so it wasn't me turning to learn psychology that learned how to do it. It was actually turning inwards to hear my own voice in conjunction with my direct experiences that I was having in real life. In my former role as a sex worker and a professional dominatrix, where I was literally paid to become the sexual fantasy of thousands of people. And that is very eye-opening, let me tell you.
I bet.
Pretty eye-opening.
Yeah. So at what age would you say that you came to the realization of your desires or your wants and they became something that you were able or wanted or desired to follow?
I think that's been a lifetime's work, and I'm
Yeah.
49. Like, this is not something that immediately made sense at all. At first, it was very confusing, and initially I was did not trust my own desire at all as an organ of the psyche. I thought, this is the part of me that sends wantings, and wantings just appear in your consciousness, right? They feel like they've come from somewhere else. You're sitting comfortably on your couch. You've got your pajamas on. It's raining outside. You don't want to go anywhere. You're content. Everything's perfect. Toasty fire, not moving. And then a desire for a peanut butter sandwich just arrives in your consciousness. Ta-da! It must be a peanut butter sandwich. It must be this brand peanut butter and that kind of bread. And this desire will come in and interrupt your status quo and move you from one state to another. It can actually get so strong that it can overcome your desire to stay comfy in your pajamas in front of the fire. And you might even go out and put your bra on. Oh, evil contraption. And then go out into the rain and go to the shop to get the right bread because you didn't have the right bread for this particular desire that just popped into your head. Desire is this incredible motivating force, and it appears and it feels to us as though it just pops into our heads. but we also have trouble trusting it because it doesn't seem to understand how the outside world works at all. It doesn't, like, it desires, it's that force that makes you want to spend all of your tax money on hats. It doesn't understand that you need to pay tax. It doesn't understand consequences in the outside world. It seems to be this force that, well, you know, a force, you could have a force to somebody's talking down to you, they're patronizing, they're mansplaining to you. You might not want to be polite. You might actually have a desire to tell them exactly what you think, but that might get you fired. So I don't think desire even really understands gravity, to be honest, because I think desire goes, yes, wouldn't that be wonderful to just leap out of the tree and fly like the bird? I don't think it understands the outside. So as an organ of the psyche, I learned it's got its own genius, but you can't ask it to give you the information you need for the outside world, because you need another organ of the psyche for that. So just like you need the heart to do the heart's job and the spleen to do the spleen's job, you need to just keep desire in its lane. But when you understand that, you can start to trust its wisdom. And then
Yeah.
oh, now I can hear what you were trying to say. Oh, now I can hear what you were trying to do for me. That is for my benefit. You are wise. You were trying to actually make me whole. That's genius. And you can start to form an allyship with this part of yourself, which is pretty special.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you say that you ever encountered like a fear of your desires? Did you have to work through like that in order to be able to trust it?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Oh my goodness. I mean, by the time I was 12 years old, I already had gigantic boobs of doom, like enormous orbs bobbing in the space between me and anyone who was talking to. Just and these people have all sorts of reactions to that, even when they don't want to. They're trying to be a good person. So my entire life started to become colored by people's reaction to their own desire and their own fear of desire, and they would treat me through the lens of that particular what they were experiencing, their projection onto me about that. And I would experience a whole lot of people who were wanting to use their desire would come out, and they didn't understand that it's not supposed to be instructions for how to literally behave in the outside world. They would do all sorts of things where, hanging out car windows and screaming at lewd things at a 12-year-old girl who's trying to just buy the milk. Right.
Right.
This is not a force that I trusted. I ended up being surrounded by people on the train, groups of young teenage boys on the train who were egging each other on in pack mentality, saying all of the lewd things they were going to do to me. And like, that became an everyday thing for me for many years. And I did not trust desire. Desire seemed to be something that other people took from me for their own benefit, not something that was for my benefit, not something that would connect and be a mutual thing. So I was very afraid. And I remember a point where I had to choose. I could suppress this force inside of myself, or I could go towards it and find out how it works. And I'm the kind of person who, when they're afraid of something, goes and pokes it with a stick to see what happens. So I ended up in the sex industry. I ended up, okay, fine. You want big boobs? Okay. Here we go. Let's see what that's about. Let's check that out. And initially, I didn't know what I was doing at all. And initially, I made lots of mistakes and I had to learn along the way. And it felt like, okay, I'm going towards these people who want to take from me for their own benefit and not share with me. So, well, if they're going to take from me for their own benefit and not share with me and not give to me, then they can give me money in exchange. Thanks, I'll have some money.
Yeah, right.
Balance the energy exchange here. Right? Give to me. And initially that was enough. But then as I got into the work further, very, very surprising things started to happen. I people would call from that place that was just desiring me for their own benefit, and they were just horny, and they just wanted a blonde with big breasts, and they wanted this particular kind of sex act, and I would agree and consent, and then they would actually get there, and then there's two real life people staring each other in the eyes, and things shift a little bit. Then, oh, you're not just a set of boobs, you're a human, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then things would, I would sit them down, and I would actually get really, really curious about what turned them on, and I'd ask them all about their peak experiences. I'd pop them on my red velvet couch, and we'd have a little tea ceremony where I'd share tea in my little Moroccan tea glasses, and I'd make it part of the seduction. I would ask them all about what excites them, what was their past peak experiences, what were their sexual fantasies. And I started to just trust the fantasies as a voice of desire, as though desire sent these little fantasies as little love letters. Like, okay, what happens if I just trust it? Well, there's that fly coming in. I've got a stalker fly trying to land on me and give me kisses, and it just won't take no for an answer. We'll talk about boundaries later, fly.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, flies have desires too.
Yeah. What was I saying? I was saying something about this, these sexual fantasies. What happened when I started trusting them, even though they didn't seem like they seemed strange? Like, why would somebody get excited about, being pissed on, or why would somebody get very excited about being dominated or being humiliated, or why would somebody get excited about being smothered by giant breasts? Why were they so interested in breasts anyway? Like,
Mm-hmm.
come on, what's going on? And I decided to just trust their fantasies, and within a consensual container of play, which is entirely different from taking desires instructions literally in the outside world. A consensual container of play,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to bring to life the underlying narrative in their fantasies. And we started, and really, really fascinating things started to happen. They would get to the end of the session and they would be, whoa, I had no idea I could feel that way. I don't even know what this is. What is this that I'm feeling right now? This is amazing. And I'd be looking at them, and sometimes we'd even be crying, we'd be so touched, because we were cracked open. We were actually open. They came in with this initial desire, which seemed really selfish, seemed really dirty, seemed really primal. But the end result of trusting the narrative within it was, I know this sounds a bit crazy to start with, but actually it felt like I was seeing the part of them that is, I mean, I have no idea if we live beyond this life or not. I have no idea any more than anyone else does. But if we do, then I was seeing that part of them through their eyes.
Mm.
It was a bigger sense of self. It wasn't the normal everyday ego sense of self. It was something else. And I was like, hang on a minute. These sexual fantasies are actually a map. They're stories. They're the exact story that our ego needs to hear in order to stand down, so that we can let our guards down and open to the vulnerability of just letting go and surrendering into the moment and connecting and feeling pleasure and just experiencing. Oh my goodness. Sexual fantasies are including our fears of vulnerability and resolving them for us. Desire, you're a genius. Look what you did, you clever thing. That
Wow.
changed everything.
Yeah. Did you have an exact moment where that you came to that realization, or was it the culmination of all of your experiences over time?
It is a bit of a slowly putting it together, but
Yeah.
the experiences kept happening, these profound opening experiences. And the only other context that I ever had for these profound opening experiences, where the little sense of self, the part that is defensive and gets really worried about whether or not we're sexy enough, whether or not we're, did you just speak down to me? It gets defensive, like that little part that's much more defensive, let's say, the ego kind of place, right? It's concerned with our self-worth, our self-identity, our social status, those things. that wasn't there. It was out of the way. And this other bigger sense of self was therefore we were able to have a direct experience of that in each other. It had moved, that little sense of self, the ego had moved into the backseat of the car at least. Sometimes it got out of the car altogether, right? Something, one of the other organs of the psyche were there, and we were able to experience this altered state. And the only other context I had for any of this sort of feeling was, oh, I've experienced this in intense worship services in church when I was growing up. When I went into a state of open-hearted prayer and worship, I don't go to church anymore. That's not my belief system. But I remember the state that I could get into, and I was like, oh wow, yeah, that worship state, that surrendering of self and opening to something bigger than yourself. That feeling of love and not feeling defensive, just open to it. That feels similar. And then I went, oh, it also feels really similar to experiments that I'd done with plant medicine.
Mhm.
It's all the rage at the moment for therapists to do psychedelic assisted therapy, because we recognize that it puts the defensive little version of ourselves out of the driver's seat and into the back seat so that we can operate and see this other aspect of ourselves. Like, oh, sexual fantasies are achieving the same thing. Wow. And so little by little, as I realized that, I started taking notice of how it was achieved, how sexual fantasies were doing that. And I would not try and live out their sexual fantasies exactly as they saw them in their mind's eye at all. That didn't work. I learned very, very quickly that you didn't necessarily literally have to have a threesome. You didn't even literally need to have a blonde with big boobs. That was not the point. That was all just a symbolic story that changed, that got your defenses down so you could open up. Once you understood how those defenses came down, you could create real life experiences that had the same effect. And I started using people's sexual fantasies as a map, their desire as a compass, and their sexual fantasies as a map to create these real life lived experiences where we could access this level of dancing like no one's watching kind of sex, and this incredible pleasure and intimacy and openness that we really all crave. We're hungry for this. We've been trying to find the way here. We don't even know how to get there. I'm like, we've got an inbuilt map and a compass. That's brilliant. let's work with that. But again, I was not working through the same lens as therapists, because I'm not trained as a therapist. I'm looking at it as the lens of stories and of my experiences of changing states of consciousness and what that's like and what I had to do to be able to do that.
Yeah.
Different perspective.
That's incredible. I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh no, I want you to I want to know what you're thinking.
So I'm curious about the moment of where the difference perhaps of where people can escape into a sexual fantasy versus like find themselves, like as you're describing. Are you able to articulate like the difference between those two things?
Yes. So escapism versions of sexual fantasies and are often when we still don't trust our desires and we still don't understand our fantasies, and we only live out the part that's exciting. So every sexual fantasy includes our ego's fear of vulnerability. It includes all of our fears of what would happen if we let go, we let our guards down. What would happen to our social status if everyone knew I was a primal sexual being? What would happen to my self-worth? Am I desirable enough if I let go and go loose and just go into the pleasure? Am I going to make a fool of myself? Is it going to be embarrassing? Like all of these fears that naturally come up of opening up to vulnerability come in. So our clever desire sends a little love letter to our egos and says, oh, you're afraid of vulnerability, are you, darling? Okay, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a story all about your fear, and we'll include the fear in the story, but we won't stop there. We'll include a way to resolve it too. And so it sends these, and it sends wanting. Remember how desire sends I want. It sends this wanting, this arousal can come with the wanting as well. They're two separate things, but they can come hand in hand. And then, it's when people don't understand their fantasies, they often will take them literally, and they will try and act them out in a way that is exciting, and they will hear the first part of desire's message. They'll hear the, oh, I've included your fear and I've turned it into a turn on for you in this part of this story, so that you know, but it does, they haven't heard the second part, which is the antidote to that. And they don't know how to bring that part to life. So they get this exciting part, and then they stop, and then they get, yes, they might have had an orgasm and they might have got very excited, but they don't feel that deep satisfaction. They don't crack open to this place that I'm talking about. You have to include the poison and the antidote for the alchemical response to happen, right? So this opening thing to happen. So you really have to listen to the story underlying the sexual fantasy for it to work. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can do it. This is not impossible for you to do, people. It's but what happens with this escapism question that you asked is that people go into this addictive cycle then if they only hit the poison and not the antidote. They go, oh, I got a really big high, which felt good, and I got to escape this feeling of shame or the fact that, you know, the fear that I wouldn't be sexy enough, or I got to feel, you know, I got to escape the thing I feared temporarily by turning it into an excitement. And that felt good, and it didn't quite complete the journey. We only got halfway there, but I know that it felt good, so I'm going to do that again. And they do this hit, and they become this addictive cycle of needing to do the same thing over and over and over again. And I did see that amongst some certain sex work clients, but that everything changed as soon as I started including the poison and the antidote, instead of being this thing where people are trying to escape a feeling that they don't like. They start opening to a feeling that they've been craving for in their soul, that we all really want, really. That incredible open vulnerability and connection and pleasure. They're coming home to yourself. And sex work clients who let me remind you, were not very sophisticated in their desires when they first walked through the doors necessarily. They were just like, yes, boobs, awesome, boobs. And they would be at the end, without me prompting, would say astonishing things like, wow, this feels like I'm on drugs. Oh, no, hang on a minute. It doesn't feel like drugs because it doesn't have that addictive pull of drugs. Actually, this feels like who I always was and I always was supposed to be. This feels like coming home. Like, there it is. There it is. That's what sexual fantasies can do if we understand them. If we learn to tune into that inner voice and ask it why it's there, what it's trying to do for us. It's always there for a reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine working with people in person is a bit different than people who are consuming content on their own at home in a pornographic manner. And
I view porn as theatre of our psyche. It's like our internal processes turned into drama for us to see, act out in front of us. And often we'll be drawn to porn that has the right poison and the antidote in it for us, but we don't know how to engage it properly. So we don't know how to bring that into our real life. There's a stop there. So we think that that's our only source of it. We can't find it. We don't know how to bring it out into our real life relationships. So then that can become like, oh, and I've also got shame for being excited about it, so I'm going to keep it secretly over here. And then it becomes this thing that they're trying to get, you know, it's like the kid going and sneaking out the lollies from the lolly drawer over and over again when no because they taste good, they feel nice, not understanding that the desire for sweetness is something else. So I think it can become an addiction, but I think that if we change it, porn itself is not inherently necessarily bad. It's just our own inner workings brought to life with actors, so that we can, our own organs of the psyche interacting with each other, but they've been turned into actors, characters, a story for us to engage with. So
Yeah.
if you look at how it works, it doesn't have to be an addiction thing at all.
Excellent. So at what point did your desire or want something different than the sex work? When did you feel that you've completed that journey and you were ready to move on?
Actually, it was really hard to give up because by the end, I really loved it. By the
Yeah.
end, it was a really powerful experience of becoming the person who could guide somebody into something really powerful. And that's actually quite a profound thing, to be there when somebody's marks down. You don't actually get, not many people don't ever experience that with somebody else. And I was experiencing it with thousands of strangers. Not every single time did it work, but I had a really good hit rate. And so that, to be the person who could do that, was, now it's fun. Now I was in the area of erotic artistry. Now I am creating erotic theatre, real life, not up on a screen. We're creating a play experience that is actually bringing out their internal world into an embodied experience together. And there's nothing more intimate and special than actually being allowed to do that with somebody. It's really profound. And I loved that role by the end. Loved it. Don't get me wrong, they're still very annoying people. Humans are humans, sex work clients are humans. So don't get me wrong, there's still irritating things. It wasn't all perfect, but it was hard for me to give up. And I did decide to give up, actually. COVID was the thing in the end that made me go, okay, in-person work, not so amazing anymore. That's too risky for me. And we're all in here. We were in shutdown, really quite intense lockdown here. So I went, okay, pivot. What do I do now? And I thought, well, at the moment, what I'm doing, I'm offering everything to people in a way that I know how they get there, but they're relying on me. I'm like the priestess of smut, if you like, that they can come to. And they're relying on me to get to this place because they don't know, they don't get it. What if I taught them how, that whole teach a man to fish, and he would eat forever instead of just giving him a fish once. So I thought, oh, I'm going to start doing that. And it took me a while to work out exactly how I was doing it. And it's still always a work in progress of figuring out, how did I achieve that? What was happening there? But I've put together a system, which I call the divinery method, because my sex work venue in Sydney was actually named by my clients. They called it the Divinery because they felt like it was like my last name is Divine, but they felt like they were, divining the erotic when they came to see me. So, water divining, where you divine and you go
Yeah.
your inner self. So they named it the Divinery. And I thought, okay, well, this is the method I used in the Divinery, so I'll just call it the Divinery method. There you go. And I started teaching people how I did that. And suddenly I ended up teaching some of the world's leading sexperts, because this theory wasn't out there. Everybody was there's other important pieces of the puzzle out there about how sexual fantasies work, but this piece wasn't there. This was new. So I'm teaching them, how do you understand, number one, first of all, the divinery method is, how do you form an embodied relationship with your own desire? Instead of relying on me to figure it out, how do you actually hear your own, form a relationship with your own desire, learn how to have embodied conversations with it, and have a two-way consensual dance with it? How do you do that? That's the first step. There's your compass. Find your inner wisdom yourself. The second part is, how do you understand the map that's in your fantasies? How can you work out what the poison and the antidote is? And how would you bring that out into, the third part is the actual journey of play. How do you bring that out into real life sex and share it with someone else? How do you bring it out of your head and into your bed in ways that respect yourself and the other person and your primal nature? How do you respect all of this and have this powerful effect? So that is what I teach people now. And somehow word spread, and I ended up teaching lots of therapists. They seek me out. I'm not officially a therapist teacher, and yet therapists keep coming to me going, oh, you've got a missing piece that we're not being taught.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really important. And they come to see me for their own pleasure, because they're like, oh yes, I want to explore myself, go into deep personal exploration through the lens of the erotic. Let's do that. That's fun. And also because then they have deeper understanding of how to be there with their clients as well, and help their clients understand their own confusing turn-ons and form healthy relationships with them. So that's exciting. I thought, oh, how did I become that? Check it out.
That is fantastic. Yeah, it feels like it has like certain elements of like some psychological concepts, but it's very much like a very unique thing that I've come across. Like it looks like it might be a part of shadow work in a way, like very Jungian approach.
I think shadow work is part of it. I think there's some big theories out there. There is Jack Moran wrote The Erotic Mind, and all of these pieces have got important pieces of the puzzle, but they're different to mine. So Jack Moran was a psychologist, I think, and he focused on unfinished childhood and adolescent business and how that can come out in your sexual fantasies. And of course it can, because anything to do with your unfinished childhood business is going to come out in your ego, isn't it? Like, of course. So, but my method doesn't just reduce it to that sort of thing. Michael Bader also made a brilliant contribution to understanding sexual fantasies, but he centers pathogenic beliefs. So again, as a therapist, he's also a therapist thinking about things in terms of what's wrong and needs fixing. What do we believe about ourselves that is getting in the way, and how to, and of course, again, that's true. That can come through, right? Anything to do with our egos. And Jungian stuff is shadow work, which is owning the parts of ourselves that we have not owned. We've disowned. We go, that's not part of my identity. I'm a good girl. I don't do dirty things like that. So and owning this part of ourselves, going, actually I do. Actually, I am a good girl and I do dirty things like that. that Jungian part is coming through as well. But what is different here is that I am depathologizing it. This is actually, I'm centering the natural, healthy, normal paradoxes that are just inherent in sex, and they need resolving. If we're going to move from one state of consciousness to another, we have to convince our ego to let its guards down. And in order to do that, we have to surrender. All of the good sex is losing yourself, just surrendering into the moment, letting that ego go. But the paradox is, in order to get that ego to stand down, you have to convince it it's safe. So you have to build your ego up so that it will drop down. And this is what sexual fantasies do. And this means that even if you had the perfect childhood, you had no trauma, and you somehow got through society without any pathogenic beliefs, I don't know how that would happen, but even if you could, right, you would still, I think, have this paradox to overcome, and sexual fantasies would still come up, and they would still be fantasies about taboo things. They'd still be fantasies of domination and submission. They'd still be fantasy of, because it is just how the mechanisms work to change from one state of consciousness to another. They have to be overcome anytime we want to do that. Ask anyone who's tried to meditate. You have to overcome the resistance.
Right.
You really do.
Yeah. Oh, wow. This is such important work that you're doing. Like, this is incredible. Thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. It's really beautiful.
Oh, I love sharing it.
Yeah.
You can see I love to talk about this.
What else?
You want some sexual fantasy examples?
Yeah, I would love that. Yeah.
Okay, so let's think about this paradox of having to build your ego up and keep it safe while also getting rid of it at the same time. This tricky thing that we have to do. There's a really common fantasy that's very exciting to a lot of younger men, where they are turned on by MILFs.
Mm-hmm.
And MILFs is short for, can I swear on this show?
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
not sure.
absolutely. Why
Okay.
not?
MILFs is mother I'd like to fuck, right? So it's about an attraction to an older woman who's not necessarily the perfect model at all, because she's given birth. She might have stretch marks, or she's a bit older, and her body is not the ideal. She might have a beautiful body, but it's not this idealized, youthful, perky peaches kind of thing necessarily. So it's very, very exciting for lots of these young men to have fantasies about this. It's a huge search term on porn things. Let's have a little look at that. Like somehow, and there's all different. There's no one size fits all. Just so that you know, just because I'm explaining one way that the MILF fantasy works out, you can't just say, oh, because he's got a MILF fantasy, this is what he thinks. You have to listen to each individual, because they will have their own unique wiring, their own erotic narrative, their own version of it. But if you're attracted, some of the things that the younger men used to say to me, because younger men used to book me as a sex worker when I was in my 40s all the time. It was one of my biggest client bases. They'd be all, I want to be with an older woman, a chubby older woman, thanks. I'm like, sweet, come on. And I would ask them, why are you attracted to older women? And they'd say, there's just less drama. Younger women, there's always this drama. And I don't know how to, like, what, there's older women, they're just confident in their own skin. They just let go. They're not worried about all of the things that the younger women are worried about. Okay, what's this drama word? That's a catch-all for everything. What on earth do you mean? What is drama? And when you poke a little bit closer, they would say, oh, they want you to do this, they want you to do that, they get upset if you don't get it right. And it's like, basically, it turned out it was a whole lot of performance pressure for them. They had to live up to all of this stuff and they felt as though they had to lead, and they had to mind read the other person, and they had to get it all right in order to be manly enough to be safe, to be vulnerable, right? So you have to build your ego up in order to let it go. You have to be manly enough to be then go, yes, my self-worth is in place, and now I can let go. So they became really excited by older women, because older women led. They knew what they wanted. They were like, and they weren't trying to turn it into a relationship that it wasn't. They knew how their own desire worked. The younger man was no longer responsible for trying to figure that out. So they didn't have to caretake the other person. They were able to focus on just letting go and enjoying themselves. And it took all of this performance pressure off them, all of this thing of having to be manly enough and to mind read the other person and get them in the way. And so it just became this super exciting thing to be with this older woman. Like this. Does that make sense? You ask questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes complete sense to me, for sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely. What about the reverse? What about younger women with older men?
We'll go into a general idea about that one, which is just generally speaking, what do you get to feel with an older man that you don't with somebody who's your own age? What felt sense is different? Start there rather than all of the social conventions and all of those sociological views. Just go into your inside, your inner voice again, back here.
Yeah.
Center it here. What do you get to feel that's different when somebody's an older man? One of the things that's a really common answer is, well, I don't have any responsibility. I can just let go. I'm precious. I am adored. Like, I'm a valued thing just for being, because I am this younger, prettier thing. I am not having to struggle for my self-worth. I just have it. I am taken care of. Them touching me the way that I magically want to be touched, of course, because that's how fantasies work. They just magically do exactly what you want them to do it. Them touching me is the reward for them. I don't have to do anything else. I'm just going to let go. I'm just going to surrender. Again, back to surrender. We're always trying to find the way that we can let it go and surrender and find the symbol that will convince our egos it's safe to do so. But let's think about, just for a minute, a different version of that. Let's just say that you're being used by your lover. They're objectifying you. They are turning you into giant boobs of doom and forgetting you're a human. Like they are. Because I hated that. I hated being treated like an object, and that wasn't actually, when no one noticed the human inside the body. I hated that in real life, but it was a super big turn on for me to fantasize about being used in sexual fantasies. That's confusing. Why? What are you doing, desire? What are you doing? So then let's think about that for a moment, though. What do you get to feel? Again, tuning into yourself. What in my internal state has changed? What do I get to feel as a result of this story? Because it's just a story. Sexual fantasies are just stories. When I'm used, oh, look, I might have had doubt that I was desired, that I'm beautiful enough, that I'm wanted, that I'm, my wobbly bits are going to be hot when I just let loose and howl like a wolf. Am I desired? Like, that goes through all of our minds. Like when every time someone gives someone else oral sex, I'm pretty sure the doubt goes in through their mind. Are they into this, or am I taking up too much time? Like, inspire me. I can't let go until you do. If someone's using you for their own pleasure, they're being selfish, they desire you because they're taking from you for their own benefit, which means, of course, you're desirable enough. Now they're like, no, I'm using you. I'm going to go down on you for an hour. No, that's for me, not for you. Get back down there. And you're like, oh, all right then. Okay. And now you've got this permission because they're being so. If somebody's nice to you and they say, yeah, I'm happy to do it for you, babe. Yeah, it's nice. There's a little doubt that might linger. But if they're using you and they're being selfish in the fantasy, like not for real life using you, but they've got this body language of using you, they've got this attitude of using you. And in the fantasy, they're using you. And they're using you just happens to magically be exactly how you want to be touched, exactly the right pressure at exactly the right time for exactly the right, like, it's actually all about you. It's 100% about you in the fantasy. So you've got your poison and your antidote. But bringing that to real life, lots of people make the mistake. They go, I'm really turned on by being used. Can you just use me, babe? And then they don't get touched exactly the magical way they wanted to be touched. They don't get their needs. The person doesn't use them in the way that they wanted. It doesn't give them the permission to spend an hour just receiving oral sex, because they're using them for their own wiring now. And that's a different thing. They want something else. So when we bring this fantasy to life, we've got to include the poison and the antidote. We have to acknowledge that it is actually that person who's receiving the oral sex. It's their fantasy. The person who's being used, it's actually all for them. Right? So the person willing to help bring that alive for them is actually in service to the person who's being supposedly used. The exact
It's very backwards.
Exact opposite, because they've taken on the. If somebody needed me to, they were turned on by a mistress who was using them for their own pleasure with a strap on, for instance, I would ask them, what body language and attitude did this mistress have towards you when they're using the strap on you? And they'd say, oh, and I'd give list of 3 different kinds. Are they being nurturing but doing it for your own good? Are they being, really cold and distant and not even noticing what you think or feel? Are they actually laughing at you and mocking you for being a sissy while they're doing it? What is it like? What's going to convince your psyche that this is right, that they're being selfish and taking for their own pleasure? Then I would drop into that body language at the right time. I'd just wait. And I might use a strap on them or I might not, but whatever I wanted to do with them that was giving them the pleasure that they really wanted, it was all for them, I'd drop into that body language and that attitude and just watch them crack open. Whoa, just works like magic.
My mind is spinning because it wants to go so many places. We talked before this about like what I'm studying as far as like psychology and actors and boundaries and intimacy. And there's this phenomenon with actors called a showmance, where their character life, if it's like an intimate relationship, kind of like trickles into their real life. And so this seems like it could be an interesting layer to that.
That's fascinating. I'm interested.
Because what you're describing of like dropping into this character that someone is desiring in their story is really incredible. And so, like, when you're an actor portraying a character, it's like, are you living out the fantasy of yourself or of the character when you're taking that from the story of the character to your real life and confusing those boundaries?
That's interesting because then in a way, as a sex worker and as a professional dominatrix, I was an actress. I was taking a role.
Yeah.
And I was not faking it. I was drawing out this aspect of myself and playing with it, which is an entirely different thing. I was in the flow state of play. If I was acting, their nervous system unconsciously knows. If I find the thing inside of me and I start playing with it and make a game out of it, and my nervous system goes into flow state, their nervous system trusts me and they will let go. So that means that I'm finding something real inside of myself and sharing it with them, even though it's their fantasy, not mine. I had the really good, excellent convenience of professional sessions and money holding a very clear container. The time is up, babe, unless you want to pay some more. So that helps. And there was only once that I actually ended up in a personal relationship after 12 years of full-time sex work. Only once, and it didn't work very well when I tried to make it a personal relationship because we were still trying to project each other's fantasies onto each other, and we shouldn't have leaked it outside of the professional boundaries at all. So I ended up making him pay again. He's still my friend. 12 years later or something, like 10 years, I think it's been. Yeah, 10 years. I still got a WhatsApp message from him the other day from the other side of the world. But every time he wants to engage with me, he has to pay because that creates that real clear container. It makes it really healthy. Right?
Right. Yeah. I think that's maybe what I was trying to get to as far as like boundaries. Did you have a ritual for yourself in order to transition from role to role or client to client that you were consciously like separating yourself like during the transition time?
It is a really, the container that's an excellent topic. It's absolutely part of the out form is creating a really clear container for the experience and having a beginning, middle, and end. And we need safety. That creates safety for both of us to fully let go. The safer and the more solid the container is, the deeper and wilder you can play. So you don't hold back. You can just go, whoa, and rip all your masks off and jiggle everything for joy. And when it's got a really clear end like that, how do I do that? How did I do that? Again, money is an excellent thing, but I have successfully done this in my personal life as well. But then again, in my personal life, I actually do want to be in a relationship with those people. Occasionally, I'd want to do it just casually. So, but the role, what is an essential part of creating that container is being really clear. Whose erotic narrative are you playing with? Don't try and play with two at the same time. Play with one. And you can both end up in that profound erotic state just following one together if you both go into play zone with it. It's quite powerful. Be really clear about whose it is, and that means talking about it at the beginning. And when we'd finished talking about it, when I'd sat them down on the red velvet couch and I'd asked them all about their sexual fantasies, which was part of the seduction. So we're already getting there, but we're building the container as well. We're talking about safe words. We're talking about what to expect, finding out all sorts of different things. Then I would put them in the shower, and I would often do an undressing ceremony. I would undress them while I'm still fully dressed, because I like that. What could I say? Undress them, and then I would lock their clothes and their mobile phone and their wallet in a cupboard, and I would lock it in front of them and put the key in my cleavage. This is an excellent thing for me to do, because that switches the power. Now that they, when you're a person alone with a complete stranger, like if they're going to want to run off suddenly, they're going to have to get their clothes out first. Like they can't do something bad to me. They can, but it's just psychologically, it flips the power. They're not going to run down the street naked. They're going to have to get their clothes back from me. And I'd put them in the shower, and then they'd come out, and I'd give them some sort of instruction of what they're going to do and where that's going to begin when they get out of the shower. And it might be, if they're a submissive person, you can wait kneeling for me. If there's somebody who's much more into the girlfriend experience and they want intimacy, you can come upstairs and share a drink with me on the bed. Let's start from there. We'll start there. And have some sort of official beginning. And then at the end, there is the shower again that brings it. And as they are, I give them another cup of tea at the end. So there's cups of tea at the beginning, cups of tea at the end. So having something, just consuming something, grounds you. And as they would get back into they're transitioning back into their ego has to come back into its normal place in order for them to operate healthily in the world. So I'm asking them questions and slowly bringing them back as they're putting their clothes back on, like the undressing, the dressing again as part of the process, and having the tea together to mark the beginning and the end before they leave again. And I'm asking them questions about their experience as they've had it. So that grounds that experience into them. Because it's like a dream. If you don't talk about it, you can't remember it. If you tell someone about it, you remember it later. So I'm getting them like saying, I tell them all sorts of things about, oh, I didn't expect to feel that when I did that, but when you did that, I got to feel this. That was pretty cool. What did you notice about the session? And then they'd start going, oh yeah, when you totally just dropped into that, when you called me a sissy slut and you just looked at me with that glint in your eye, I just lost it. That was so hot. And that I'd find out more about their narrative than I didn't know before. And then next time we could go even deeper together. So we create this process of ever expanding and ever ongoing discovery. It's never stuck. And by following this method, we never had to do the same thing over and over and over again. We kept following this compass and this map into new territory. It didn't become a rut. It became a shared self-discovery journey. But boundaries, as far as your actors go, I don't know how that would translate across. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that like a container is definitely important. But actors are never taught like how to get out of something. They're always taught how to get into the role to the best of their ability. But how to get out of it is not something that they're trained to do or that a director will ever take time to attend to, like after a rehearsal or a show. So it's kind of left to the individual to transition out of that.
Oh, fascinating.
Yeah.
So maybe some of the skills of learning how to be really clear around the intention of what they're doing, that they are going to go into it and have a thing to mark it in. Like if it's a BDSM session where I'm being a dominatrix, the beginning might be put a collar on. At the end, take the collar off.
Yeah.
Right.
Like a simple, like a
yeah.
ritual or a signal or yeah.
Yeah. I'd change my tone of voice too. By the end, like the conversation that I had as they were coming out of it is a different tone of voice. It's no longer, I'm not in the play state of flow anymore, or the flow state of play. They're now actually encountering this other part of me that is just me. And that has its own effect of setting things back into, this is the end. That was that experience, it's finished now as well. One of those little signals that help.
So I want to honor your time. We're coming up close. If people would like to work with you in any capacity now, how could they work with you and what are you offering? And how can we
Oh,
put you on a platform to share your your,
I
your stuff?
completely forgot to self-promote. Oh no. Okay, I got too excited to geek out on this topic. Okay, so if you want to know how you can start unpacking your own unique erotic wiring, so that because you can do this, I do teach the advanced sexperts and people who are interested in using the erotic as self-discovery as well. You don't have to be a sexpert or a therapist, as long as you are willing to go deep into your own self and you want to explore this play for yourself. If you want to begin that process, you can do that. I'm at myfantasies.com. I'm putting up a freebie, which will be there by the time this show is published, where I am walking you through celebrity crushes, where you can look up Google images of someone, a celebrity that you find attractive, and get several different pictures of them when they're about the same age and they're still the same body type. They physically are the same, but notice why you're attracted to some of them and more than others. What's different in the body language? What's different in the attitude? What's different in the power dynamic? How do you feel different? And I'll walk you through how to start becoming aware of what creates the right safety for you to ignite your interest and your desire. And you can start just experimenting already with playing with this in your sex together with your sexual partners, going, oh, well, yes. And you'll be so surprised that you think that your attraction is because the celebrity is beautiful, and that's part of it. But when somebody else takes on the same psychological symbol for you, oh, trust me, you don't have to be the beautiful one for it to be very, very powerful. It works just as well. So that's a really liberating thing to know. I'll walk you through how to do that. That's myfantasies.com. If you want to learn my method and get some coaching from me, you can contact me for a discovery call through artemesiadevine.com, and we can feel into it and see. But I only take a few people at a time because we go deep. So
Yeah.
there's a bit of a waiting list, but you can always try.
Excellent.
I forgot to say one last thing. If you get the freebie, you get on my mailing list, and I constantly give out tips on my mailing list of how to work with this stuff. But you'll also get the VIP treatment for when my book comes out, because my book's coming out.
Oh.
The book is The Spirituality of Smut. If you're interested in hearing all of the stories of how I figured this out and all of the details of how it works, get on the mailing list so you don't miss out on this book.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to put all those links into the show notes so people can click on those really easily and find you. Because I know that people are going to want to find you.
Thank you so much. It's been such
So,
fun.
yeah, I have one last question that I ask my guests before we wrap up. Unless you have anything else that you feel like is on your heart or your mind that you would like to say.
Oh, well, I could talk forever. So let's just rein it in. My desire does not know that there's a time limit. Maybe that's how I should wind it up. Remember that desire as an organ of the psyche is a genius for changing your internal state of consciousness, but it is not instructions that are literally behave in the outside world. We need the help of other organs of the psyche to work out how to translate its genius into real life experiences.
Yes. Excellent advice. So this last question, sometimes it prompts some more discussion. But if your inner voice had a billboard, what would it say to the world?
If my inner voice had a billboard, this world is full of so much more awe and wonder than you can possibly imagine. And the more we tune into that inner voice, the more we find it. This is a treasure hunt. Your desire actually knows the way. It knows the way. So once you do learn how to trust it and put it in right relationship with yourself, life becomes this astonishing astonishing experience, even with its challenges, even with its difficulties. It becomes amazing.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, actually, I just thought of the word, however people pronounce it. People have different ways. The daimon or the daemon, um,
Mm.
and how that is so connected to your work with desire, as it's this inner urging within us, and if we ignore it, it can destroy us. But if we
Mhm.
follow it, it can open us up and lead us to great places. So,
Right. And if we don't trust it, it becomes this scary monster that we think is out to harm us and other people. But if we form a relationship with it, we can dance and dance. And it's the exact opposite to harm. It actually benefits everybody involved. So
yeah,
yeah.
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 Well, thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it, and I enjoyed this very much.
Yeah. I loved it too. I learned some things too. That was really good.
Thank you so much for joining me this week. If you're listening and you like what you hear, please consider subscribing and rating this podcast, as it really helps get this podcast out to other people who might be interested in hearing it but don't know about it yet. And also, if you'd like to contact me or reach me, you can reach me at unconditioningpodcast@gmail.com or unconditioningpodcast on Instagram. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay tuned in to you.